All right, we're back. It's COMP2068, Advanced Web Programming, and it's week 8, lesson 8, part 1, and we're broadcasting live on YouTube with Hangouts on Air, right? So you guys are live. We're going to be doing a thing today on authentication with mean stack, full stack stuff. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I put up for your reference up on Blackboard. As well as we're going to also talk about assignment number 2, which is going to be an authentication assignment due next Wednesday at midnight. Right, so you got a week to do it, but it's going to be based off your portfolio site. So you're going to take your existing portfolio site, and you're going to modify. You're going to create a secure area, and then that secure area, you're going to have some business contact information that you're going to store there, and you're going to have to do some CRUD operations on the business contacts, add them, remove them, update them, delete them, whatever you're going to read them. And you're also going to have to log in and log out and have make sure that no one can get to the secure pieces of your site. Okay. So what are we doing today? So the first thing I'd like you to do is I want you to download and install, if you haven't done this already, for the people who came earlier, Visual Studio Code. All right. So we're moving away from brackets. Not that brackets isn't a good editor. Brackets is great. But we're moving towards Visual Studio Code. It's kind of an up-and-coming IDE that Microsoft and Google are using for their Angular 2 project that's coming out. So I think it's a worthwhile download. Another real great reason for using Visual Studio Code is it allows us to use TypeScript, right, which is a superset of JavaScript to develop our web applications. Without using Visual Studio in Windows. You can use it cross-platform. So that's kind of a really good reason to do that. And there's other advantages. It's good to know a couple of IDEs. It's very similar to brackets, but there's quite a few differences. Like one thing I don't like about Visual Studio Code, I kind of said this in the first class, is it doesn't really help me find the path. So if I want to put in a URL path, brackets comes up with some code hinting to find that. That's the one thing that if Microsoft can improve, it would make me happy with Visual Studio Code. Other than that, it's very similar to brackets. One thing it doesn't have that brackets has, which I like that it doesn't have it, is it's not a modular IDE. It's like it comes with what it comes with, and Microsoft regularly updates it, and you get what you get. I like that because I don't have to think about it. On the good side, from a brackets perspective, you can add modules so it's not as fat as Visual Studio Code. But Visual Studio Code is actually quite lightweight compared to Visual Studio, which is like 70 million lines of code. This is much lighter, and it was created with TypeScript, with web technologies, right? So that's kind of a cool thing. So please download it. We're going to talk about this today as one of the little things we're going to learn. I've also created a container for our project today, which is up on GitHub, right? So I'm going to go on, I think it's here, on GitHub, and I've got a container that I'm using. You can go to github.com/Georgian College. And like I said earlier, yeah, I stole that one, right? So it's mine. Georgian College /COMP2068 week 8, right? So if you go to week 8, that's the one I'm going to use. The morning's class, we used COMP2068 lesson 8. So week 8's for you, lesson 8's for them. And this is where we're going to build our application here. So this is the place that I'm going to go. I'm going to set up my repository in a folder here. So here's my COMP2068 week 8 folder that I'm going to be using. And again, if I was going to use Visual Studio Code for a second, and I want to kind of start off a new project, I can drag and drop this, not here like we normally do in brackets, but over here. If you do that, what it does is it sets that up as the main project for Visual Studio Code. You'll notice it's kind of similar. It has a couple of cool features that I like. One of them is it has a connection to our GitHub. From a version control perspective, it has Git built in. You can search through it. You can also do some debugging that's built in. And of course, it links nicely to our operating system files. So here's our operating system files. And if I was to open this up, you see there's nothing in there, right? I could certainly add stuff in there. And it would be reflected immediately inside Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is just called code for those developers who use it all the time, right? I think it's done on purpose. Okay, here's one thing that I really love about it. I can right-click anywhere in Visual Studio Code, like here on the sidebar, and I can say open in terminal on the Mac or in Linux, or I can open in command prompt on Windows. If I click this, Now I'm actually open to the project folder in command prompt or terminal, which is really quick and dirty. You don't have to worry about changing directories and finding where your project lies. I'm going to do a bit of a refresher, the first piece for this one. We have a lot of stuff to cover today. I mean, it's ram-packed. I ran out of time in my first session, and I had to kind of copy and paste. I'm going to try and get as much of it typed in with you as possible from an explanation perspective. So I'll break down, as I type, I'll break it down what it does. But it's ram-packed full of stuff. I honestly think the authentication piece and future iterations of the course, we might have to do it over a 2-day span, right? Because it's so ram-packed with information, right? One of the challenges I had, some of the comments I had in the first class was like, still don't get it. That was the first thing I got. I kind of still don't get it, right? I still don't get Node and Express. The whole mean stack is a little bit weird for me. I don't have JavaScript background. That's what they were telling me. And it's like you're going in, several levels deep into like function after function after function, and I don't understand how that all flows. That kind of stuff. How can it be easier? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a JavaScript course and it was a pure JavaScript course? It would be nice. And I'm doing one next semester. For winter semester, we're putting on a client-side script. All it is JavaScript and a little bit of TypeScript, which we're going to talk about. But unfortunately for you guys, you don't have that, so it's not going to help you. We did a bit of a primer, but this isn't just JavaScript we're doing here. We're using an API, an application programming interface, and we need to kind of learn how to piece things together in order for things to work in Node and Express, and that's what I'm going to try and help you with today. So Rich isn't here anymore. It's just me. I'm Tom, right? I'm not Rich. He does things in a different way. He's very organized. I'm organized in a different way, and I'm hoping that between the two of us, we can give you the experience you need to be successful, right? So this one here, this class, we're talking about authentication with Express, Node, Mongo, and there's a module we're going to use called Passport, which is going to help us communicate and authenticate. Any questions before we begin? Okay, so let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do here in I got my terminal window up here, and I've also got access to my operating system files, right? So it's in a kind of a window. I'm going to do some scaffolding first. That's the first piece, and I want to use the Express generator as my my scaffold, so kind of my beginning. So let's do it as a refresher. How do I add Express? I want to use my Express generator to scaffold my website. Anyone can tell me the command I would put into terminal to do that? Come on, guys. I know you guys are out there. I want to use an Express. I want to make an Express app with the Express generator. How do I do that? Assuming that I have Express generator loaded globally, right? So it's part of my terminal. Who does not know what I'm talking about? Put your hand up, right? Because that would be bad if you didn't know. Oh, I'm just going to pick on somebody then. Okay, so how do I do it? How do I use my Express generator to generate an Express app?
Express-E and project name.
Okay, but I'm in the project. That's good. So I don't need to do the project name. I just go Express. So -E. E stands for EJS. It's my view manager that I'm going to be using, right? There's several different versions of this. You can use EJS, Jade, handlebars. There's other ones. You can even use regular HTML without a view manager. So here's enter, and it does this. It kind of adds this scaffold, and it's immediately reflected here in Visual Studio Code, if you notice. So a bunch of different folders, right? Okay, cool. One thing it didn't do is it didn't add my gitignore file, and I need to do that because I want to share it with you on Git, right? So there's a couple ways to do this. I could create it here. I did it a different way in this morning's class, but I think what I'll do is I'll just create it here in VS Code, right? So I'm going to right-click here in the sidebar, new file, and I'm going to call this .gitignore. I need this file because when I communicate with GitHub, I want to ignore certain files, like my node modules folder. I don't want to send that up to GitHub. That's like 30,000 files sometimes, right? That's poor, right? So node_modules. I kind of list in my gitignore file what I want for Git to ignore when I push it up. I also want to, since I'm using a Mac, I want to put it in my ds_store, right? Because I don't want to send that up, anything like that. And if I'm using Cloud9, I want to use C9 as stuff I want to ignore. And you can put other things inside, the gitignore file that you want to ignore. I'm going to save that. So I got my gitignore file. And I want to initialize my Git repository before I do an npm install. So how would I do that? I'm going to say git init, right? So initialize my empty repository. Notice how immediately in Visual Studio Code I have 9 changes that I've made, right? It shows me here when I do that. It's reflected immediately, right? I'm going to git add dot, so stage everything. When I say git add dot, I take all the files that are inside my folder and add them to the staging area, right? That's what it's called. And the staging area is where I'm saying, okay, I'm ready to send this stuff up to GitHub, or to add it to the repository first, my local repository. Now I'm going to add a commit. Git commit -m, which actually is the message is creating a named snapshot, if you will, for the state of my files where they are today, right? And I'm going to call this initial commit. And it shows you all the files. I've added 9 files that are staged right now. And now I want to push it up, but I don't have a connection with my remote, right? How do I get that? I got to go up on GitHub, which is here. And if you notice, there's actually a little code that you get right from when you create a repository in GitHub. You get some example code, and this is what you need to put in this little line executable here, which is git remote add origin, and then the name of the URI. Right. So I'm going to go back into terminal and just paste that in, and then press enter. And then I'm going to git push -u for unconditional origin master. And what it's going to do is going to take my folder the way it is right now and push it up to GitHub. Okay, so now it's there, it's live, and for me to test it, if I press refresh, you can see it here that it's there live. So here's where I'm going to do all my code changes. So if you want to follow along with me, I'm going too quick. You can't type quick enough. You can always go to GitHub. Again, it's Georgian College. So github.com/Georgian College /COMP2068-week 8. Let's create a README file for this one, right? So I'm going to call this repo for advanced web programming authentication, right? At Georgian College. Right? Here we go. And let's put that as a new file, committed as a new file. So there it is. I've got another, if you notice, I've got a second commit, but I don't have one locally. So I'm going to pull it down. So I'm going to say git pull. Now I have it locally, right? If you notice in Visual Studio Code, I see that there's a README file right there, right? And I've got all the files accessed just like I normally would in brackets. No difference, right? Okay. Let's do a couple things to make this go, this project. One thing, I need to add, I need to do an npm install, because this is a base Express project. Remember, we did a scaffold. So all I've done is take Express, and it's generated a simple project for me very quickly, but it's empty, and I need to modify this for today's example. So I'm going to say npm install. Okay. It's going to do its thing, and then when it's done installing, it's going to give me the list of stuff that's installed. If I see how it finds this list, again, just a reminder, the package.json file here, which is part of our project root, it tells us a couple things. It tells us all of the dependencies and also names the project. Now, I know the way things are going right now from a package perspective, we want this in lowercase. So I'm just going to change this thing here. So I'm going to say COMP2068, and it's week 8. I'm also going to turn the version to version 1.1, because we're going to kind of with some different versions later on. And my start script is wrong, right? I don't want to have my server file under bin. Remember, we did this one time with Rich. Sometimes Azure and Heroku and other sites like that don't like that when it's put in there, although it will follow the package.json file. It's easier for us to pull this out into its own file. So I'm going to take hold of this one and just pull it out here. And what it does is it pulls it out of the bin folder, right? And I can rename it here. I can rename this file, which I will, server.js, and change the app path by taking away a dot. So I've updated my server.js, and then I can get rid of my bin folder because I don't need that. There we go. Hold on. Make sure I click on the right thing. Tom, delete. Yes. Okay, so my bin is gone, and now I want to test my files. So what I can do is I can go to, let's make sure I save everything, saved, right? And I go back down to terminal, and I'm going to do one of these, right? You should have nodemon installed, right? Nodemon should be installed globally, and the way we'd install that globally is npm install -g for global nodemon, and that'll install globally on your system, right? Now, some people have problems with their system, the system in front of them. In this morning's class, they said, my system still doesn't work here at school. I'm still having problems with connection and all this kind of stuff. How can we fix that? Well, there is no way I can totally fix it. You'd have to go through the environment variable path, and I showed you guys that a couple times when I was here with Rich. You have to fix the environment variable so the path, so it points at the right location for your npm and node modules, right? Okay, but if you do this nodemon, if you do this little command, then what happens is I can do this now. I can say nodemon and press enter, and if I do that, it'll indicate any problems that I have. And it says starting node bin www, which means something went wrong. Like, how come my package.json file didn't change? Well, I didn't add in server.js here, which is where it should start. This line start in this JSON file, right? What it does is telling me the start script is this node server.js, right? So if I say npm start or nodemon, it's going to look for the start script and what it starts. All right. So if I do that again, if I restart nodemon, right, or let's just kill that and try again, nodemon, then I see that my node application is started. Okay. How to test this? I'll go into a local host on my browser, and I see that I get Express, right? So my application is working. This is just the regular scaffold that we get. And this is a little bit of a review for you. So if you haven't seen this before, you've seen it now. Questions so far? All right, let's update GitHub. So I'm going to kind of shut this down. I'm going to go git add dot, staging everything, git commit -m. I'll say updated Express scaffold. I've changed it a little bit for my purposes, right? And then git push origin master. Okay, good. It's up there now. So you got all the changes. So there's a couple things I want to do. I want to talk about authentication, and I've got a bit of a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to go into. I'm going to start with that right now. So I'm going to go to my courses. And under lesson 8, there is an authentication piece that I'm going to be talking about. So authentication with Passport. Okay, with Passport. And let us just make this a little bit smaller for us to see the page. There we go. So what am I going to cover? Take away those silly guides. I'm going to cover understanding passport strategies. We're going to talk about what a passport strategy is. Integrating Passport into your user's model view controller architecture. We're going to talk about that. And then using Passport's local strategy to authenticate users, and a bit of an overview of Passport OAuth strategies. Who knows what OAuth is? Anybody? Wow, you guys are really lively this afternoon, right? Like normal. OAuth, it means if I want to log in through Twitter or Facebook, GitHub, instead of using my regular username password authentication strategy, I can do that with OAuth, and Passport allows us to do that. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to do it, and you're going to see why. Because even getting to the point where I can get all the piece parts integrated that I want, it's going to take some time, right? And we just will run out of time today in terms of talking about OAuth. One of the things I will allow you to do is on your assignment number 3, which is due next Wednesday at midnight, right? 2, where you add in this secure section. OAuth is a bonus mark. So if you want to try and implement OAuth, one of the authentication strategies out there, like GitHub or Google+, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. There's all kinds out there that do OAuth for us. You'll get a bonus mark for that. So that's one thing you can do and learn on your own. Okay, so let's talk about authentication. I mean, it's part of our everyday lives, right? We go to a website and we want to log in because we want to consume its services. And we usually put in our username and password, and we get a response. We're either authenticated or we're not, right? So Express is so lean, right? Express.js is so lean. It doesn't have anything to connect with a Mongo database. It doesn't have that, right? Not from scratch anyway. And it really doesn't have any way of authentication. It's not built in. So we have to use another module that adds on to Express that gives us the functionality that we need to connect with a Mongo database that we're already using Mongoose in order for us to authenticate. So that's what we're going to be doing with Passport. Okay. How do we do Passport? Well, we have to do this npm install passport -- save. Now, for those people who are just watching me, please don't watch me. Please get in there, be dirty like me, and do it. Right? Worst case scenario, make mistakes. Errors will come up, and you'll have to deal with them because when you're on your own, you're going to have to do it anyway. And you won't have me around to help you out, right? So check it out. Do it now. Make mistakes. Fall down. This is the safe time to do it. We're not doing an assignment today, right? Okay, so let's try this out. So I mentioned in the earlier class, I'm just going to clear my screen here to show you what I can do, right? I want to install all my dependencies. That's the first thing I want to try and do. So let's try and install them all. As a dependency in our files, and it actually dependency. So if I was to press enter, it downloads Passport, right? And if I go up on Visual Studio Code, you can see that my package.json file now has Passport as a dependency in it, right? So if you were to go up on GitHub and download my package, this whole package I'm putting together for you, this application, you wouldn't download the Node modules, but you would do npm install, and npm install would take all of these dependencies and add them into your project. Again, this is a review for people who forgot over the break, right? Okay, I need to add several more. Now, there's a couple ways I can do them. I can do them singly, like this. Like, for example, I have to also connect with something called a local strategy, right? We talked about OAuth, which is logging with Twitter and Google and Facebook and so on, right? But we're going to do a local strategy, logging with username and password, right? So we need to add another module that's an add-on on Passport called Passport Local, right? So let's do that. So npm install passport, if I can spell, test local, right? And then -- save. Oh man, this is going to be a pain in the ass if I do -- save and blah, blah, blah for all of these ones. Isn't there a quick way to do them all? There's a couple ways. I can update my package.json file and just do an npm install and with all the ones I need, right? Or I can do it here on command lines. Let's do it this way. So I know I'm going to need a session, right? Because our session module that's part of Express, right? There's a separate module for holding sessions with Express called Express Session. I need that. I also am going to need some way of encrypting my password because when I put files inside MongoDB, they're just unencrypted. You could actually go in there and see what they are, right? I don't want my password to be unencrypted. I don't know about you guys, but I want my information to be protected. So I need some kind of hashing mechanism, okay, which means I need to use bcrypt. I also need Mongoose because I need Mongoose to help me access Mongo. Without Mongoose, no Mongo, right? I can't do that without that. So I need a bunch of little things here, right? So let's add them all in together. So I'm going to say npm install, right? And then I'm going to start typing. So the first one is bcrypt Node.js, which is my encryption package. I also need something called connect flash. I'll add that in too. Connect flash. Connect flash is like this little message that I get when you go to your login screen and you say incorrect password, incorrect username, and it doesn't go away. It persists even if I try and post or get. It doesn't go away. Like when you post, it clears the screen, but not so with Connect Flash. Connect Flash stays there, persists. You can see the message, and it's a kind of neat little feature. So Connect Flash. I'm going to add in Mongoose, right? Because without Mongoose, no connection. And I'm going to add in, well, that's enough. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'll add all this stuff. You notice I've separated everything with the spaces, -- save, and press enter, and it's going to do everything at once instead of one at a time. Yeah? Let's see if we have everything. I'm going to go back to my package.json file, and you can see that I have bcrypt, body parser, which came with the Express generator, Connect Flash, cookie parser came with it, debug, EJS, Express itself, Mongoose, that's what we just added in, Morgan, Passport, Passport Local, and the serve favicon. Okay, so those are all the project modules you need for this particular project today. So let me update GitHub with that. Hey, notice something. I've got one file that's changed up on GitHub, right? On the left here with with VS Code, right? You notice that there's one change, and if you notice here, if I click the GitHub icon, right, I can see that there's a change, a modification, right? Well, here's what I can do. Without going to terminal, I can go into this sidebar and click plus. Plus actually stages this change. What staging does is equivalent for me saying git add dot, adding this change, this update. So I'm going to add this change. And then I can name the change locally. I can do a commit. Here's my local commit. I can say updated project dependencies, right? And then I click this checkbox, right, this check mark. And when I do that, I don't have any changes anymore. And take a look at the other thing I can do. Right here in Visual Studio Code, I click this button, this ellipses, and I can say push. As long as I've done the push one time on the terminal, it's going to connect with my GitHub repository and be done. All right, so nice functionality built into Visual Studio Code. Yes? Yes, thank you. I know it went fast. It's right here. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? So again, all I'm doing is I'm creating a list of dependencies that I've added into my package.json file, which is my project's manifest that keeps track of all the things I need for my project to run. Without this file, my project will not have everything it needs. Okay? Okay. Next piece. So I've got this stuff. I've got, I'm starting to put things together, and I need to reorganize my app.js file, because my app.js file is like the single file where all my modules come together. I also have my server.js file. There's two files that are kind of the main files in my application. If you notice here, one is server.js, which runs the server in the background, right? And the other one is app.js, which runs kind of links all the modules together, registers them, right? And basically creates my functionality, right? So when I do this at the top, right? When I say var express is equal to require express, what I'm actually saying is get the entire express module, and I want you to smack it, place it into this to my document. It's part of my project now. And that's what Express and Node is all about. It's all about modularly, kind of creating or packaging an application up, right? So I have this really cool module I made. Let's say you and I are we're working together, you're part of my company. You write a module, right? And I really like what you did for the authentication. Why am I going to write that module again, right? I'd rather take that whole module and reuse it in my next application. So I can write my own Node package, my NPM package. I can make it private too if I want. And I can NPM install your special authentication piece. And bam, I have all the stuff that you worked on for hours. And it's ready to go. That's the beauty of NPM and Node. But it's modular. And so we have to accept the fact that we have to build it. It's not something that's ready to go with a full, it's not a full framework right from the get-go. It's something we have to build. Okay, so one is, so I include, or this is like an includes area where I register, right, all the applications modules. That's what I'm doing here, right? And what I'm also doing here, if you notice, is I'm creating a friendly name, path, express, logger, cookie parser, body parser. These are just friendly names to refer to these modules. These modules actually create objects, right? So body parser is the body parser object, right? It doesn't say class, but really it's like an object of a class, right? It has all of the, if I look at any one of these, like for example express, the express module is loaded into this express variable, so the express variable has access to all of its methods and all of its functions, all of its extra little properties, whatever, are built into this thing. So it's loaded with that kind of stuff, almost like an instance of the Express module. That's what it is, right? Okay, a little bit of what that is. Okay, well I know I'm going to need a couple more things. I loaded up my my passport and everything else, but in order for me to do passport authentication properly, I need a bunch of other dependencies. One of them is this access to a session manager or a session store, if you will, right? So my session store, think about a session store as I want to be able to persist the knowledge that I'm logged in. I log into a system. What if I go away to another site and come back? I want to know that I'm logged in still, give or take some kind of timeout, right? I'm logged in. Or if I switch pages and I'm not logged in anymore, imagine if I log in every single page I go to, that's a pain in the ass, right? So instead of doing that, I have this something called a session that keeps couple things, my user information, whether I'm logged in or not, okay? And it's a session store, so I can actually put stuff into it and take stuff out of it, right? It keeps track of my session, and it makes sure that if I go to another page by using the back button or something else, that sometimes it'll break the flow of my session, and I can say, hey, you know what? You'd have to go. You've done something wrong. Just like if you go to the banking sites, trying some banking online, and then you go back, right? Use the back button to go back, and it'll man, something's wrong because you've broken that chain of kind of flow, right? Workflow. Well, I can do that too, sessions. But sessions, what they do is they keep track of what you're doing online in terms of authentication. And that's what we're going to use it. In order for us to use that, we have to enable an Express session. So that's the first thing we're going to do. Is we're going to say var session is equal to require. We're going to require the Express session module as one of our requirements. We have to require this before we do our other stuff with Passport, okay? So the first thing we want to do, we want to kind of put together some additions to this app.js for authentication. So here's our additions for authentication. So we're going to put in there some other modules. One is, well, goddamn, Mongoose, right? Without Mongoose, we can't connect to the database, right? So require Mongoose. So Mongoose, again, you guys have done CRUD with Mongoose, right? With Rich, where you did creating, reading, updating, and deleting from the Mongo database store. Right? That's what Mongoose allows us to do. Mongoose, that instance of the Mongoose package is loaded full of methods in order for us to access MongoDB, right? I also talked about Flash, right? It's not the Flash, like from DC Comics. It's Flash, which is the ability for us to create messages that are persistent when we do our post and get, right? Especially when we log in or register. If we get a message like incorrect password, incorrect email, or this username has already been used when you're trying to register or something like that, those are Flash messages that we want to kind of have. So we're going to say var Flash is equal to require. Remember, the module name is connect Flash, right? Okay, next one, of course, is Passport itself. So Passport, so that's the ability for us to actually do authentication. That's what the Passport module allows us to do, right? All right. Before we continue, we need to, before we even do authentication, though, we have to have some kind of database and a connection to the database. So let's get that out of the way, all right? So one of the things I like to do is I got to think about this as a database configuration, right? I want to, and sometimes that database configuration is pretty sensitive information, like username and password, if you're gonna kind of connect to MongoLab or something. And this is maybe one of those files I don't want to include it. I want to put them in my git ignore file so they're ignored, so they don't go on Node, up on Node or GitHub, so you don't see them, right? So then you would know my username and password for MongoLab. I don't want that, right? So I usually put them in a config folder or some other folder like that. So I'm gonna say new folder, and I'm gonna call it config. I'm going to put a new file in the folder by right-clicking on the folder and saying new file. And we're going to call this thing db.js. Instead of typing this in, again, and I've done it a couple times today, so I'm going to minify these things for a second. I have a working version that I'm going to drag and drop in, right, for us. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's my config folder. This is the completed version. And in my db.js, I'm just opening up a text wrangler here. You're going to see it's like a couple lines of code. I'm going to explain them in a second, where I want to go back in here and paste, just to save me a little bit of typing. All right, so what am I doing here? Module exports, right? Module exports is equal to URL. I'm making it an object. Here's my object, right? Which includes a property called URL, and the URL is MongoDB with localhost And then my database is going to be called userdb, right? Now, if you were using MongoLab, your credentials will be different, right? You would have MongoDB at, right, password, right? You know, a username colon password at, the path for your MongoLab database and so on. And that's why we keep it here. I would probably disclude db.js for my, I would put it in my gitignore file, okay? On that, Mongo, I have to run MongoDB as a server in order for my application to work, because I need a server, a database server for it to work. So let me kick that off here. Now for you, it might be as simple as doing what I'm going to do, which is going just to type in here sudo on the Mac, or just without sudo on a Windows machine, MongoD, right? And what this does is it kicks off, I love when this happens, right? It kicks off the Mongo server unless it's already running, right? And again, I might already have an instance of the Mongo server running, and that's why it says this, right? It says Mongo lock is not empty, and there's a way of killing the server, right? Stop database or something like that, and I can look that up. So if I go something like this, Mongo, right? You notice it's already running. My server's already running, right? I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not going to try and stop it. If it's already running, all the power, right? But for you, you kind of come up with this little, window that says Mongo, and if it's not, if you go MongoD, it'll show you that the database is running. Here, my database is already running, and it's running on port 27017, right? So I'm connected because I have a connection here. A terminal window, right? So let's say for Mongo, if I was going to check out what's in my Mongo store, first I would do something like this. This is some regular MongoDB commands. Show DBS, right? That shows my databases. And if you notice, I already have my userdb database because I did this thing this morning, right? We're going to just use the same one for today, right? So userdb. And if I want to use my userdb database, I would say use userdb, right? And then what that would do is it's switching there, and I could say show collections to see my collections, and I could see that my collection is my user info collection. So I say db.userinfo, I can spell, right? .find, and we're going to pipe that into something that looks pretty. It looks like this. This is what I kind of made this morning, right? With a username and password hash, right? So that's our goal. Our goal is to kind of put together a piece of information that's in our database that looks like this, okay? Notice that the password is not a regular password, it's hashed, and we're going to get that through our bcrypt module, right? Encrypting the password, okay? So that's good. So we got Mongo running, which means we don't have to worry about it having a connection problem. That's the first thing we're going to do, right? I'm showing you these commands for a couple reasons. You need MongoD, the Mongo server running for this test. If you can't connect to the Mongo DB server that's on your system, you have to navigate sometimes to that particular location on your desktop here in front of you, and then go MongoD to kick it off, right? And then that'll start off the MongoDB server. If you don't do that, you'll get an error, and you won't be able to get around it because we need a Mongo database. Alternatively, you could create a MongoLab data store, right, and change this URL to reflect that. So if you want to work with MongoLab today instead of a local database, you can totally do that. It's up to you. Okay. All right. So we've kind of defined this one, and we've defined our database string and a bit of setup, right? Let's complete our database configuration, right? So I'm going to go back to app.js, and again, I've added some things for authentication. Now I got to do my DB setup. So let's like add that in as something we need to do. So DB setup, and in here we're going to say var DB, right? We're going to create a variable that we're going to make it equivalent to this require, right? That we're going to require our db.js, the one we just made. We're going to require this object as this DB variable is going to refer to this object inside of our path. So we're going to say, again, we're referring to an object that's inside of our the same root level. We're going to say config, so /config for the folder, and /db.js. You can actually just use db. And what that does, it creates a binding between the module that's inside of our folder and my app.js file. Remember, the app.js file is the central file that controls all the other files, right? It's almost like where all of our functionality comes together, right? Okay, so that's one piece. Now that we have access to DB, we can always do something like this. We can use Mongoose, right? Mongoose connect, right? Connect to the database on, take a look at that. It gives me the URL because it knows the URL, right? My URL that's inside of that config file, right? But we also want to check Mongoose, right, to connection.on. We want to make a kind of an event listener for it that checks if there's an error, right? Then we need a callback function, which we're going to make anonymous. And what we're going to do with it is we're going to say console.error, right? Mongo DB connection failed, right? For whatever reason. We don't know why, right? But we know it's failed, right? So that's the next piece to our connection strategy. So there's two pieces now we've done. We've done the kind of the back pieces. This is actually part of this session is also part of our authentication. Actually, I should put it there. Just move that in there. So cut there and put it here. It's all part of our authentication. Our DB setup includes, first we have to do all this, then we can set up our DB, right? And that piece is done. Let's test it. So I'm going to go back into my terminal window here, right? And I'm going to put in nodemon. Now, if it fails, we know that there's either no connection to the database or something I've done wrong. Let's check it out. And it's failed, which I love when this happens. It says app crash, waiting to start. It says cannot find module express session. All right, so let's see why that is, right? Here's express session, right? And there's session. That's interesting that I wasn't able to find it. And my question is, did I actually add that in, right? And notice how it's not in my data, it's not in my dependency, right? And maybe I missed it. That was one of the ones I missed. So let's add that in. So I can kind of Control C, and I'll say npm install express session -- save, and that'll add that in. Okay, cool. Now let's run nodemon again. Yay, we're running, right? So one thing I forgot to do, but we kind of came back to it. Let's run our application to see what it's like. So here's our application. I'm going to refresh, and you notice there's no issues right now. And if you notice when I refresh, I get this styles.css page that comes up. If I try to go to a file that doesn't exist, like a root that I haven't gone to, like for example, I know I've got the users root, right? And that's going to say, you know, respond with something, right? That's kind of part of our root. What if I go to something else, like I don't know, my link, right? It's going to say not found because there is no my link root, right? I have to define the roots inside my roots folder, right? Again, this all should be a refresher for you, stuff that you've already seen, all right? Who has not seen this stuff or has a, you know, is not good with any of the stuff that I'm just doing? Please put your hand up because I want to try and address it, right? This is basic Express right now, okay? Okay, cool. So we've done that. Let's update GitHub, and I want to do it from my command line here. So I'm going to Control C, and I can do something like this. I can say git add dot git commit -m, and I'm going to say added DB setup to my files, and then git push origin master. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to type where I can just have gone into my app here and gone into the GitHub folder and done it all for me, right? Sometimes we want control like this though, so it's okay, but sometimes we want to do it through the GitHub so that we don't have to interrupt nodemon, right? I keep nodemon running, and I can use Visual Studio Code here, and for those people who came in late, download Visual Studio Code, okay? That's what I want you to do. All right, so we've got it going. It's up on GitHub right now. And we've got, for the most part, we're pretty cool. Let's take a look at that PowerPoint presentation again and see where we're at. So we've got this Passport installed, and we need to configure Passport. That's the next piece, right? And we've done part of it already. We've done this, the require statement, but we need to use these app.use. Notice that we have an initialize and we have a session, right? App initialize and session. And we have to put these something before my root declarations. That's where I say I want to put them. So let's just copy these two lines, right? And of course, I cannot And I want to go into here, and I want to go into app.js. And somewhere before my root declaration, by the way, it's not these. These is just assigning the folder to roots and users. That's what it's doing, okay? But it's not actually the files index.js and users.js to these two things. But that's not the roots. The rooting is down here where I say app.use, where we have roots and users, where you have this root thing. So before here, I want to kind of add that in, right? Where I put in some kind of, connection to my passport, right? And I want to initialize that, and I also want to initialize Flash at the same time. So let's just put it in. And if I go here, I also want to app.use Flash. And Flash, remember what it does, is it gives me that little persistent message, right? So this is still part of the, passport configuration. FYI, sometimes position matters, right? In the order of things when it comes to your app.js file, right? Questions so far? So that's the one piece that I want to put in there, and then let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation here. So I've got that, set up, and I initialize, and what it does is it bootstraps the passport module, and passport session depends on the Express session module that I added earlier, right? So I set up a session store with Express, and then what I want to do is I want to use passport session to pass information. My daughter, she's crazy for me, right? Pass information, especially when I'm teaching. Pass information to it from my username and password. I'm passing stuff into my session. Because remember, I can use session for also connecting to the database. There's different things you can use a session for, right? We're going to be using it for username and password and for persistence. Okay, so there's several different kinds of passport strategies. We're going to be focusing on our local strategy, right? And there's a bit of code some setup we have to do to get that going. So we've already installed passport local. That's part of our requirement. And now what we have to do is we have to do a couple things in terms of the remainder of our setup. By the way, we're still not quite there in terms of setup. Just underneath our, I'm just going to go back to our app.js. Underneath this piece here, and before our passport initialization in our session, I want to set up, in order for our session to work properly, we have to app.use this session object, right? And inside our session object, what I want to do is I want to attach an object that we're going to define with a few properties. One is the property secret, which is almost going to be our secret handshake, right? So who can tell me what the secret handshake is used for? The secret. Why do I need a secret when I have sessions? No one knows about authentication or security, I guess, huh? I can hijack a session. If I knew the secret, right, I can hijack it and tell the session I'm logged in, right? As long as I know the secret, I can do that. But I won't know the secret. This is another thing that I probably might want to do in future iterations of this app that we're building together. I may want to put this in some other kind of config file, right? That's almost like, I might call it session.js, right? And it kind of sets up the session so that it's secure, so I don't see what the secret is here in my app.js file, right? For now, we'll keep it here so you can see it. That makes it a little bit easier. I also want to put a couple of switches on. Switches are flags that I can turn on or off, right? So here's an on, save, it's going to be called save uninitialized. And I want to make that true. Also got to add a comma in there. If I don't have the comma, that's not a proper JSON object, right? Another comma with another switch, resave. I also want to make that true. And again, what that does, it saves session information in a certain pattern. Okay, so again, this is additional, we'll call this session setup, right? We have to do that. And again, when I say session setup or config, when you hear that word, you might think, hey, that's a good place to, that's a good piece, a chunk to put in a config file somewhere. And how do we do that? Okay, so I've got this all set up. I'm ready to go. what I need to do is I need to add in some other files in order for us to make things go. One of the things are, before I set up a strategy for logging in and so on, I need to have a way of determining almost like a user model. How does my user look when he logs in or she logs in, right? So I need the user model, and I can define that just like we did before with Rich when you guys made the article application, right? We have different articles. We have to create a schema, a Mongoose schema, right, in order for us to design a user. Now think about a DB. We'll go back to MongoDB and compare it to SQL, right? So we have Mongo database, which is a NoSQL database. It's unopinionated, right? You can put anything you want in it in any order, right? But what we're doing here is we have to create a schema in order for us to know how our users are going to be stored in the database. A collection, right? Our collections are just tables. Think about them as tables. That's the analog on the SQL side, right? It's a table. If I say collection, it means table. If I say document, it means row. Here's the row. Each row is a document. Each record is a document. So record in SQL, document in MongoDB. Okay. So what I need to do is define the schema, the table schema, if you will, just like we do in SQL, where we define the tables and rows and all that stuff. We can kind of into our root, and we're going to do this model, and then we'll take a short break after we create the model. Okay, so new folder, and we're going to call this folder models. There it is. And inside our models folder, we're going to put a new file that we're going to call user.js. And how you should read this thing is user models, our user model, right? That's how you should think about it. And that's how it's organized. You have to organize your files, your folders, if you will, as containers for your code. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to kind of, at this stage in the beginning, we're going to import a reference to Mongoose, right, and decrypt, because remember, we want to definitely have some kind of access to encrypting our username and passwords, right? We're going to say var mongoose again. We're going to add it in, is equal to require mongoose. So we can get all of the fancy API class elements, the methods and properties of Mongoose that we can use so we can access MongoDB. Then we're going to kind of make a reference to bcrypt. Okay, bcrypt. We're going to call it bcrypt. It requires, and this is where some of the funky stuff comes in. It's going to be bcrypt -node.js. Okay, and if I say required, not requires, I'll be okay, right? Okay, so bcrypt and mongoose. We need another one. I need to make a, I need an alias. So I need an alias for the mongoose .schema, right? Because I don't want to always say mongoose.schema something else. It's a pain in the ass, right? So we want to make a quick and dirty alias for the mongoose schema. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say this. We're going to say var schema is equal to mongoose.schema. So that way we don't have to type that in over and over again. It's just an alias. So our word schema is equivalent to saying mongoose.schema. All right, this is a shortcut, if you will. Okay, now we start defining the, we define, our user schema, right? That's what we need to do. And that includes what properties are part of that schema and what's the collection name going to be when we start adding users to the collection. What collection name are we going to use? We have to tell it right here, right? So we start typing. So var our user schema then, right, is equal to a new, we're going to use a new keyword to create a new object, new schema, right, which is the shortcut we took. And we're going to open up this, we're going to pass into it an object, a JSON object, and we're going to include all the stuff that we need for our users to log in and all that kind of stuff and log out, register, right? Well, obviously we need a username, right? Which is going to be of type string. We're also going to put in a password, which is also going to type string. What are these types, man? JavaScript doesn't have types. No, it doesn't, but MongoDB does, right? So we might as well define what these things are, so Mongo knows what type what it's getting. So email is a string. How about display name? When we log in, you know, we might log in with our fancy cool name, but we also want our display name to say the name, like Tom, you know, one of those kind of things, as opposed to, you know, Killer69, you know, whatever your username is going to be, right? We have to kind of create a string for our salt, and the salt is really the thing that we're going to add to our username to mix it up, to hash it up, right? Our provider, and right now you're like, provider, what do you mean? Well, because right now we're using our local service, a local strategy, username and password, but tomorrow it could be GitHub, right? So that's going to be the name of our provider. Is it GitHub? You know, so I want to kind of prepare this, our schema, just in case you want to use OAuth sometime in the future, right? Makes sense. And then, of course, with that, we have to put some other things like provider ID. We also want to put provider data, which is the data associated with the provider. And also a couple of other ones, and that I like a lot, which is kind of it's kind of housekeeping stuff for me, right? I want to know when the user was created and if or when he was updated, right? So I want to put in created as a number and updated also as a number. Right, so I've got kind of these are all the things, think about these as all of the columns of my table. These are the column names, the field names, if you will, of my table. Now, I don't have a table, I have a collection, right? And on that, if I have a collection, I have to name what that collection is going to be. So I'm going to put a comma here with another object, and inside that object, I'm going to say collection then. It's going to be called user info. Okay, cool. That's our schema. So normally we could end this off by saying something like this. You might have seen this syntax before. Module.exports is equal to something like mongoose.model, and then we're going to pass in the name user, because it's going to be the user model, and then we're going to use user schema, our user schema object, as our blueprint. Okay? That's what you normally would see. But we need a couple more methods in order for us to finish this user model up. Remember we talked about hashing? I want to hash my passwords, and I want to be able to read and write, right? So how do I do that? Or check to see if it's the right password at least. So first thing I want to do is I want to generate a hash, right? And the hash is going to be something where I take my salt, and I'm going to add it into my hash, and the salt is going to be generated by bcrypt. Bcrypt is going to do all that encryption piece for me, right? So how do I do that? I'm going to say user schema. And this is interesting. I want to add a method to my user schema model, but I'm not using object-oriented methodology here. It's prototypical inheritance that we have in JavaScript. But what Mongoose has that helps us out is it has this a method called the methods method. And what the methods method does, it adds in any method name we want, any function we want as a method, a named method inside of our schema, right? So we can say methods.generate hash, that's what it's going to be called, is equal to function, an anonymous function that's going to take a password as one of its as its parameter. And what I want to do in here, right, with this thing is I want to return. What it returns is a bcrypt hash sync is what it is. We take in a password, which is our password from the parameter password, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to salt it, right? So we're going to say bcrypt.gen salt, which is going to generate the salt sync, right? And we're going to use 8 passes. It's very interesting. 8 passes, right? And we're going to put in null. We're not going to have a callback function. All right, that's what it's going to do. Make sense? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying take my password and salt it and return a salted version of my password. Okay, that's what it's going to do. This function. So whenever I call the generate hash function, that's part of my user schema, it's going to hash my password. It's going to add some salt to it. So it's going to look like what we saw earlier, which is this. It's going to look like this, right? That's another password. Actually, you know what this password is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 becomes this, right? So you can't tell what the hell it is, right? That's what hashing is all about, right? It's very effective. Okay, let's do one more. So we generate the hash. Then we have to check to see if it's valid, right? So we're going to say, so we have to check to see if password is valid according to its hash, right? So we're going to say username, user schema, sorry, dot methods. We're going to add another method. We're going to call it valid password, right? That's the method name that we chose, right? It's equal to anonymous function. We're going to pass in a password to check. This is the password we're going to check to see if it's correct. And then we're going to return another bcrypt compare sync, right? We're going to compare it with password. And this is something that someone's got to tell me why. This dot password. Why this dot password? Okay, so here's my password. This is the local copy. This is the local password. What does this password refer to? There's nothing in here. Up here, right? So this is this password, right? This is part of our schema, part of our object, right? This is our class, if you will. In our class, we have an instance variable called password, right? And we're passing in the password here, the local copy of a password that we're passing in, and we're comparing it with the hashed version, which we're going to actually store here, right? You'll see how this works later on. But we need both of these, generate hash and valid password, in order for us to store our encrypted version of our username and password, or just our password. You can also encrypt the username, by the way, if you want to. And some people do. They just don't have to do the password yet.
Before comparing the passwords, we have to generate the same password that we are taking from the user.
We're still taking the original password from the user, right? We're passing it into the generate hash, right? Yeah. And we're putting it back into the user password. So the user password is gone. We don't never know what it is.
So
it's always
had a hash generated password.
That's all we ever have.
And so when we are need to compare both passwords,
we hash it again and compare it to the hash. Right? We cache it again and compare it to the hash. So if the hashes match, we're good to go. Right? 'Cause it's going to be the same algorithm that's going to generate a hash. It's not random. It's actually there's an algorithm that generates whatever the hash is going to be. Right? Make sense? So but it hides it from us. If you know how to dehash it or decrypt it, then you can figure it out. But it takes a little bit of time to do. And again, we do 8 passes here. There's other ways of doing this. You can do 10 passes, 20 passes, 100 passes, whatever you want to make it even crazier, right? Harder to crack. And usually it's a higher number than 8. Okay? Okay, this is a great spot to upload to GitHub and take a short break. Let's say take 10 minutes and come back, and we'll continue with this insanity, right? Let me just stop broadcasting here, and then when we come back, I'll continue.